But before I take your question, did I answer anything of what you brought up? Did I help? Not so much answer it, but did I add information to some of what you were?
Oh, all of the things that you've said are things that I have reflected on in my own relationship, because I have had to have the courage to go where I fully participated in the process. And I went from being in denial that there was a problem to realising that there was a very serious one, and then having to make some very painful choices around that.
Yeah.
So I guess it's been a gift in many ways for all of us, and I guess what we're working through here, is accepting that at this time for us globally, where we're having to deal with these very major, serious, global, ecological and social and cultural challenges, that once we get through that denial, some of us, the majority of us, however many it's going to take, that the opportunity for doing that composting, that the ecosystem somehow, humans have an extraordinary capacity to survive adversity, and that there's that process will happen through that as well. So I guess some of us will survive better than others. It's really nature.
And everyone's ecosystem will restore itself in a different time. What it may take one person to go through and come out on the other side of may take many, many, many more years for another person, even though it's a divorce and the same number of years, same type of situation, whatever. Our ecosystem will be restored in a sense in its own time, in a way. But you really beautifully articulated the excursion there and the courage that it takes to be able to do ecosystem restoration. We know how hard it is ecologically to do ecosystem restoration, where you turn a desert, a place that's been through desertification, into a flourishing, restored, green waterway. It's the same thing for us. But to have the images there help, and also to have an imagination. And what I mean by that is, can you imagine what you want your ecosystem to look like post-tsunami? Because that image will help bring you there. What do you want to do when you have been working for a job for 20 years and you actually love it, and because of economics or whatever, your boss comes in and says, sorry, the whole department is no longer existing, and everyone loses their job, and your whole life revolved around that job?
I just want to say that we actually need some amount of disturbance in our life in order to grow.
Yes.
And it's the same, we in nature, we need a certain amount of dead organic material, and we need to leave it there because there are so many living organisms in the soil that depend on dead organic material.
Yeah.
So we learn from nature. We think about what happens to us. We learn then how to behave with nature from the point of view of conservation, because we do need to leave a certain amount of dead trees and branches and leaves on the trails, because that goes back into the soil. So if we don't have the minimum amount of disturbance in our life, also we don't grow. Therefore, we should see that what happens to us is not for nothing. It is for something, and for us just to go forward and grow it. That's what I want to say, the connection.
Yeah.
Thinking about this, talking about you today, and from the point of view of our work in conservation, and teaching people what's happening out there and what's happening in our life is the same thing.
Yes.
We are very strongly connected.
Yeah.
And once we lose that connection, that's what happens. People lose the connection between what they are and the earth that they are walking on or every day. When we lose that connection, we don't understand what's happening there, and people are not really able to understand what's happening in the life.
Yeah.
So just one of those.
Yeah, that's a beautiful connection, because of course we know that we go through psychological devastation when we go through disturbance, But ecologically, we may, as conservationists, if if it's just dealing with it from a pure scientific position, we forget that devastated landscape has psychologically devastated the people that live there. There's an absolute emotional, psychological devastation that's gone on with that, or a loss of a particular wildlife species in an area that people depend on, or just the loss of beauty, What are you going to say?
No, and that leads to happier, happiness, because of the happiness.
Yeah.
And when you see happiness, what happens to the your life, the activation of that. So in the end, when you have reflection and you think things happen for something, and you know how to use that material, of course you need to have that awareness, capacity to do that exercise, then in the end it's also going to be happier because the same way that nature and all the elements are there in the system, to have beautiful trees and flowers. So I'm just,
Yeah, good. And the more questions we can ask ourselves in each of these areas, the more questions we can ask ourselves around our energy and our diversity and our sense of waste, the deeper we can kind of unravel the situation. But something else that the two of you actually brought up I wanted to just touch on before we move on is you use the word denial a lot, and certainly when we work with psychological waste or any type of waste, it's not just psychological, when we work with ecological, psychological waste, we can certainly go into denial, but we can also compensate, and we can create multi types of behaviors that help us not look at the real issue. Denial would be like it's not an issue, it's not a problem. Compensating would be, for example, you do something completely different so that you're not reminded of how that particular issue makes you feel or that particular situation makes you feel. Or you would take on a completely different behavior, something very out of character, very uncharacteristic, so that you don't deal with the situation anymore. So we do a lot of things around waste psychologically with our behavior, with our thinking, with our emotions, with our feelings. Okay. So everybody stand up. Take a deep breath. Just that.
I don't know why, but I just don't want to cry. That's before I then suddenly came on 2 weeks ago. And it just suddenly came on, so just about to cry just before. But I'm okay now.
Yeah. Well, I guess I probably should have started out with a caveat, but I'm afraid everyone would have left the room. Is that the material is psychoactive, and because it produces feelings. That's the whole point. Is that we need to understand how we feel. We're all pretty good at knowing what we think about things. Some of us even have more opinions than others about things, but we're not always at a depth in how we feel. And the thinking, the rational, doesn't always change the behavior. The data never, when I worked in the fisheries in Latin America, the data never stopped the fishermen from overfishing. You can produce the research and say, the fishermen in Galapagos or Costa Rica or Mount Pello, if you keep fishing here, there won't be fish here. Here's what the research and the data say. And they look at you like, what planet are you from and who are you to be telling me this in the first place? I had fished here for 50 years. My father fished here before me. And by the way, his grandfather fished here before me. So go away while you're running. And so the data doesn't do it with emotion. Emotion produces a change. Okay, just want to move some energy. All right, so speaking of change, then we move into our fourth area of change is inevitable. Oh, there's your compost pile. So if you don't know what a compost pile looks like, here's a good image to work with psychologically. When life starts to stink, here you go. What do you do with it? You got to work it down. You got to be able to take it apart and try to understand each of the components to this pile. What's the organic matter consist consist of, what's the behavior consist of, what are the emotions and the attitudes that are in this compost pile. So, change is inevitable. We all know change is always taking place, natural or certainly anthropogenic. Ecosystems need change in order to flourish or maybe even to die off. I don't want to always say that everything has to be in a state of flourishing. There are some times when some things do need to die off, some things do need to change so that something else can emerge. And this is kind of where we're going to end up today is, what's something new, or what new thought or idea or emotion might emerge from your experience today, but also as conservationists, what might emerge if we approach something ecosystemically, what new idea or new way of working with that particular culture, particular tribe, particular issue could come from looking at it ecopsychologically. We've kind of got to know each other a little bit better. I'm just wondering if you guys want to share space and maybe move to the same table, or if you're not taking notes, just maybe get around so that you can talk more with each other as we kind of go through these next two areas. If you're comfortable with that, if you like where you are, that's fine too. And at the end, we'll gather, we'll circle wagons a little bit more at the end. Okay, so this idea of change, what image can we work with on this? And I've chosen plants, a particular plant, you probably recognize it, because plants provide great images to work with around change, because they exhibit some of the most astounding and competitive behaviors as well as adaptive behaviors. This is a Venus flytrap, as you know, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this particular plant. But plants as a organism are rooted, so they're not mobile. They can't get up and go in search of a resource or in search of food. So competition for plants can be quite intense. This particular plant figured out a way to not have to compete in already very barren areas where the soil was horrible, didn't have enough resources, and it changed its behavior from getting its nutrients in the soil to getting its nutrients from protein. One of the most amazing adaptations, I think, that we've seen, certainly there's numerous of them in organisms, bacteria, even some of our animals, but the Venus flytrap, a now carnivorous plant, is found only in environments where the soil is poor, because it doesn't have to compete for resources there. It's found another way to get that. So they, for me, illustrate the evolutionary concept, adapt or die. And if this plant had not been able to, really adapt, not just make a little change in color or a little change in a particular need for a nutrient in the soil, they adopted the entire behavior, changed the entire behavior, then they would have become extinct. So critical, I think, in the overall discussion, certainly that I've been hearing a lot this week, or maybe even a silent discussion, is competition for resources. I particularly heard it at the World Leaders Dialogue panel the other day with the gentleman from Shell Oil, and some of the questions that were coming in from the audience, and then some of the sharing of thoughts and ideas from the panelists. It wasn't said, but it was very clear that we're competing for resources with oil drilling, we're competing with resources with mining, with extraction of all types, with overfishing. So I think that's something that really needs to be, we need to be more honest about, that it's not just economics, it's that we're competing for resources in order to survive. So we know that ecologically, but what does that mean for us psychologically? Well, competition for resources varies. And if we think about how we do compete for resources, think about this metaphorically again. When we talk about competition and how we see this in our lives, how we see it in our work, how we see it happening in the world in different ways. If we think about how competition acts in the natural world, it can occur between plants, because I'm using that example today, but it can occur between animals or landscapes, individuals, organizations, certainly interculturally. Competition can occur between our family members, and certainly between nations, and ideologies can also compete for attention too. So competition occurs between these areas, and either they share a resource, they find a way to share a resource, or they don't. And one of the things we know about competition is that it limits growth, it limits the opportunity for survival. In the sense that with species, it limits its reproduction capacities. And if you think how this works in our family, think about your siblings, maybe if you had a big family, or if there was other kids in the family, how you competed for mom and dad's attention, competed for a resource there, competed for mom and dad's attention, or mom's attention. Competing for food in a family living from poverty. Two communities sharing a water resource. Competing religious systems. So the second thing about competition then is that it can limit directly or indirectly how a species, an organization, an individual, or institution is distributed. If competition is so intense, you may have an opportunity to create a second company or a third company. Or it can be such that you're so limited you can't distribute yourself out either. So competition can limit directly or indirectly how we potentially can think about how things are distributed. That would also mean how we think about things and how we feel about things. If we are inculcated into what the family believes or thinks, we may grow up believing or thinking what the family determines we should believe or think, and not even have a sense of what we really think or feel about something. Competing species, or organizations, or institutions, or within our own intrapsychic situation, we compete for resources that, if we don't coexist, could potentially wipe out another one. So competing species, for example, are more likely to coexist when they can use resources in different ways. So we see that with kids. Mom may have family time at one time, and dad takes you out and plays baseball with you at another time. Or you may go fishing with your grandparents one weekend and share another time with your friends. So there's a partitioning out of resources. Just working with this metaphorically now. The last idea about competition is the outcome. The outcome of competition can be altered by environmental conditions. Depending on the environmental conditions of your family, whether it's your family of origin or growing up, the family you created, it will depend on what's going on competition-wise within that family. Are you so busy you don't have a lot of time for the kids? If you've got more than 1 or 2 or 3 kids, that's a big family to spread time around. And how do you do that? With energy, with diversity. Is there potential waste there, potential missed opportunities? So again, how do we look at competition in our family situations? How do we interact competitively or not? And not even knowing that we're acting in competitive behavior. This is my program, and I really would like everyone to take it on. It works. It's worked for us, and it's a good program. Blah blah blah. And you should do it. Well, wait a second. I have a program, and it's really worked for us, and it's been very good for our folks. We think you should implement this program. So competing for programs as well, especially when you're in one area trying to resolve one particular situation. And again, the outcome of that competition can be changed by disturbance or evolution, which I find interesting. So the outcome of competition can be also determined by evolution, and that's kind of what I want to come back to in a few minutes. Very important. Humans are also incredibly competitive. We've been looking at some of the ecological ways of competition, but I want to focus on how we are competitive. I already mentioned our family ecosystem and competing for affection, food, playtime, story time, affection, love. But we also do this in our adult life. We may compete for boss's attention, for coworkers' acknowledgement, for whatever the situation is, we compete for those resources too. And that, I think, comes from a need to be heard and seen. It might not be so much that it's a negative competition, but it's a need. There's a need there to be heard and seen.
Just an example, students.
But can you use the microphone if you guys have such good things to say here?
Sorry, just an example, competition between students at the university within the same group, because I lived doing my master's degree in Calgary, Canada. There's a lot of competition between students not sharing information, knowledge, so another example.
And also in our own departments, whether one particular program gets funding and another one doesn't, and those kinds of things. We all have engaged in this kind of competition. So workplace,